Have you ever had an incident in your life that made you question everything you knew or thought you knew about the world we live in? If you have, then you might understand what I've been through. This past weekend, I was visiting my cousin brother Cole in his small town in the middle of nowhere. It was a 2-hour drive from my city. Earlier this year, he had married a small town girl and settled down in their rural community. It had been a big surprise for all of us. Cole grew up with malls and multiplexes, subways and skylines. Just as I did, for that matter. Still, I've always liked my cousin. I didn't make it to their wedding, so I was making peace with the weekend trip to their place. Their house was right on the outskirts of their town. Cole greeted me with a familiar smile, joking about my bulging waistline while I gave him a hard time about his receding hairline. He showed me the guest bedroom, and it was more than ample space for the 2 nights I'd been spending there. That's the good thing about these rural towns. Square footage is cheap as dirt. I noticed some strange ornaments on the bookshelf in the room. They appeared handmade and reminded me of those little trinkets you see in New Age stores. When I asked Cole about it, he just shrugged and mumbled something about his wife and told me to wash up for dinner. I soon got the impression that his wife Ashley liked to keep to herself. She served dinner and didn't say much else to me the whole evening. Cole gave her space and didn't seem to push things with her either. Around her, he seemed less jovial. Men change after marriage, I suppose. Not that I cared. After dinner, Cole and I had a fire outside and had drinks and joked around like the old times again. I kept expecting him to open up to me about his wife or tell me more about this little town, but he never did. All he would do was talk about our old adventures together. It was as if he had nothing to tell me about these past few months. Something felt wrong. Every hour, Cole would get up and go into the house. He was chugging one beer after another, and so I assumed he needed to pee. But I finally got curious and walked up to the house and looked inside. Cole and Ashley were sitting at the dinner table, which had been cleared, save for one lit candle. They were holding hands and muttering something. I got the impression that it was some sort of prayer or ritual. He seemed to be following her lead. I don't know if they saw me looking or not. Cole came back to the fire and never brought it up. When I cautiously hinted at it, he gave me a blank look and pretended he didn't know what I was talking about. Over the course of the weekend, there were other incidents. There were various rules and rituals which I could tell they were following, but for the most part they left me alone. They did ask me not to leave the house after midnight, and if we ate outside, to never leave any food by the fire and to make sure that I cleaned that up completely. I also heard them say something about taking me out to a well, but since I didn't see one on their property, I never asked them about it. By the end of the weekend, I was fed up by the silent treatment from Ashley, and by Cole clearly being on edge at times but not saying anything. It was a long weekend, and I had meant to stay another night, but I decided I'd had enough. Despite Ashley's protest, I told them that I would be leaving that evening. She had suddenly turned into a keen host and nearly pressured me into staying the night until I lied to her and told her that my work wanted me to come in early the next day. I wasn't unhappy when I finally left on Sunday evening, waving bye to them in my rearview mirror. The way back took a different route. It was getting quite dark, and I wish I had left earlier. But eventually, the slow moonlit drive was not so stressful. I was on a dirt road in the desert with little else around me for miles, save for some bushes here and there. It was almost peaceful. I soon saw something to the left of the road. At first I thought it was a tiny little shed, but as I got closer I saw that it was a well. I slowed the car to a halt and then lingered. I was alone on the road. Was this the well they had mentioned? Unlikely. I was already 20 or 30 minutes away from the house. Why would they come out here? I saw a tiny little sign post in the dirt next to the well. There was just enough light to see the word private scrawled across it. I left my car and walked past the sign. Not that I'm a troublemaker, but just the whispers about a well I had heard over the weekend, and now this. I figured I would go have a look, or maybe see how deep it is. See if there's actually any water down there. Well, it was a stone well, wider across than I was tall. It had a dilapidated roof over it, and the thin piece quietly rattled in the windy night. There were some other items scattered around the well that looked like tools. I went right up to the well and took a look down below. Nothing. It was pitch black. I couldn't even tell how deep it was. I looked around for a pebble, found one, and dropped it down. It took at least 2 or 3 seconds before I heard it clatter at the bottom of the well. No water. It was then that I felt I was being watched. I wondered if my eyes had adjusted to the moonlight by then, because I saw more of the area around the well. There were dirty, greasy buckets that I hadn't noticed before. There was also suddenly a strong stench that came up from the depths of the well. And, to my surprise, there were even little steps carved within the side of the well wall, almost as a makeshift ladder leading down. I felt an urge to climb down. I don't know how much time had passed, but with each minute I felt more and more that I needed to climb down there. I resisted the urge. That's when I heard my cousin's voice from down in the well. "Hello?" a shaky voice called out. Is someone up there?" I didn't answer. Impossible. And yet, it was unmistakably his voice. "Please, help. I've been here for so long, for months. I remember the anguish, the pain, in that voice to this day. Cole's voice was abruptly cut off, and for a second there was silence. What I heard after that was a blood-curdling scream of pure terror. The scream echoed across the desert and then faded. I hadn't moved. I kept listening. I could swear I heard something else now, and it was getting louder. It was a shuffling sound. I kept listening, and sure enough, it sounded like something was coming up the well, fast. I don't remember all the details of what happened next. I must have made a mad dash to the car. I remember starting the car and putting it into drive. That's when it came out of the well. It had dragged up some sort of large bed sheet with it, so it was hard to get a good look. It was tall and oddly proportioned. It moved in an unnerving way, almost as if it had joints and limbs where you would not expect it to. It turned its head towards the car, towards me. What I saw next, I will never forget. Underneath the bed sheet, I could see Cole's twisted face. His eyes locked with mine and he screamed again. I drove off. It took several minutes of driving in the desert before the scream stopped. Minutes became hours, and I had never been more relieved to see the city lights as I approached the city. When I got home, I stayed in the car for a few minutes. My head was spinning and I felt exhausted. Then I noticed that I had a new text message from Cole. "What the hell did you do?"